The blood on Olivia Adams's dress wasn't hers, but the shame in her eyes belonged to her alone, as she walked down the main street of Coolidge, Kansas, clutching 3-year-old Thomas against her hip, while the women on the wooden sidewalk turned away and whispered behind gloved hands. It was September 1882, and the autumn sun beat down mercilessly on her bonnet as she tried to ignore the cruel stares, the pointing fingers, the deliberate way decent folk crossed to the other side of the dusty road to avoid contact with a fallen woman. The blood had come from a cut on Thomas's knee when he'd tumbled off the mercantile steps, nothing serious, but it gave the town gossips one more thing to cluck about. Poor child, they'd say, being raised by such a mother. No father to speak of, no husband to guide him. Just Olivia Adams and her sin made flesh, a constant reminder of her wickedness. Olivia pushed open the door of the general store with her shoulder, setting Thomas down gently once they were inside. The little boy's eyes were still wet with tears, but he'd stopped crying, brave as always. She knelt beside him, examining the scrape, pulling a handkerchief from her sleeve to dab at it gently. "You're all right, sweetheart," she murmured, kissing his forehead. "Just a little scratch." "Excuse me," a sharp voice cut through the quiet store. "Mrs. Peterson" stood behind the counter, arms crossed over her ample bosom, mouth set in a hard line. "I'm going to have to ask you to conduct your business and leave. You're disturbing my other customers." Olivia glanced around the empty store. There were no other customers. There rarely were when she entered an establishment. She straightened slowly, gathering what dignity she had left like a threadbare shawl around her shoulders. "I need flour, sugar, and coffee if you have it," Olivia said quietly, her voice steady despite the burning in her chest. "Mrs. Peterson's lips pursed. "Cash only, no credit for the likes of you. I have cash." Olivia placed 3 carefully hoarded coins on the counter. Money she'd earned taking in washing and mending. Work that came to her back door under cover of darkness, because respectable women wouldn't be seen giving her employment in daylight. The transaction completed in hostile silence, Olivia gathered her small parcel and took Thomas's hand. They stepped back into the harsh afternoon sun, and she tried not to flinch when a passing rider deliberately steered his horse to splash muddy water from a trough over her skirts. The boarding house where they rented a tiny room on the edge of town offered no respite. Mrs. Crawford, the proprietress, tolerated them only because Olivia's rent was always paid on time, but she made her disapproval clear in 100 small ways. The thin walls let in every whispered comment, every prayer for Olivia's corrupted soul, every suggestion that Thomas would grow up as wicked as his mother. That evening, after putting Thomas to bed on their narrow cot, Olivia sat by the single small window and allowed herself the luxury of tears. She'd been 17 when she'd believed the promises of Daniel Thorpe, the banker's son who'd sworn he'd marry her, who'd painted pictures of their future together right up until the moment she'd told him about the baby. He'd left for Chicago the next week. His father had made sure everyone knew Olivia Adams had tried to trap his innocent boy with her wanton ways. She'd been 19 when Thomas was born. Alone except for the midwife, her own mother had paid before washing her hands of her wayward daughter. She was 22 now, and the weight of 3 years of scorn had carved lines around her eyes that made her look older. The next morning brought no relief. Olivia had promised Thomas they could walk to the creek to look for smooth stones, one of their few free pleasures. She packed a small lunch and they set out early, hoping to avoid the Sunday church crowds. They almost made it. Reverend Walsh caught them as they passed the white clapboard church, his black coat dusty from the road, his eyes hard with righteous judgment. "Miss Adams," he said, making her unmarried title sound like a curse. "I trust you'll be joining us for services today. Perhaps you might finally seek redemption for your sins." "Thank you, Reverend, but no." Olivia kept walking, but he moved to block her path. "That child needs proper Christian guidance. He needs to learn right from wrong, to understand that his very existence is a product of wickedness that must be overcome through prayer and penance." Thomas pressed against her skirts, and Olivia felt something snap inside her chest. She'd endured their scorn, their whispers, their casual cruelty, but she would not let them poison her son. "My son," she said, her voice low and fierce, "is not wicked. He is innocent and good, and if your God cannot see that, then perhaps your God and I have nothing to say to each other." The Reverend's face purpled with rage, but before he could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Madam, I believe you dropped this." Olivia turned to see a man on horseback, tall and lean, with dust-covered clothes that spoke of hard traveling. He held out nothing, his hand empty, but his gray eyes were kind and his weather-beaten face held no judgment, only a careful politeness that gave her an excuse to escape. "Oh," she said, catching on quickly. "Thank you, sir. Might I offer you and the boy a ride? I'm heading toward the creek myself. My horse could use the water." The Reverend sputtered, but Olivia was already lifting Thomas, and the stranger was reaching down to help them both up. His hands were strong and calloused, the hands of a working man, and he settled Thomas in front of him before helping Olivia up behind. "Hold on, madam," he said quietly, and urged his horse into a gentle walk that took them away from the church, away from the Reverend's angry protests, away from the town that had tried so hard to break her. They rode in silence for a few minutes, Thomas delighted with the view from horseback, before the stranger spoke again. "Name's Robert Grant. Most folks call me Rob. I just rode into town yesterday looking for work." "Olivia Adams," she replied, "and this is Thomas." "I appreciate your intervention, Mr. Grant. Just Rob is fine." He glanced back at her, and she noticed the scar that ran along his jaw, a thin white line against sun-darkened skin. "Seemed like you could use a friendly face. Those are in short supply around here. I noticed." His voice was neutral, but something in his tone suggested he'd seen more than she'd realized. Town like this, folks get mighty comfortable with their judgments. They reached the creek, and Rob swung down from his horse with easy grace, reaching up to help Thomas down first, then offering his hand to Olivia. She hesitated, unused to courtesy, before accepting. His palm was warm against hers, steady and sure. Thomas ran immediately to the water's edge, and Olivia called after him to be careful. Rob led his horse, a sturdy roan gelding, to drink, then crouched by the creek himself, washing the trail dust from his face and neck. "You really just arrive in town?" Olivia asked, settling on a fallen log where she could watch Thomas splash in the shallow water. "Yesterday evening. Got a job at the Henderson Ranch starting tomorrow, came into town for supplies." He dried his face on his sleeve and came to sit a respectful distance from her on the same log. "Already got an earful about local gossip from the bartender at the saloon." Olivia felt heat creep into her cheeks. "I see. Heard about a brave woman raising her boy alone despite this town doing its level best to grind her down." Rob picked up a stick and drew absent patterns in the dirt. "Heard a lot of cruel speculation and not much Christian charity. Seemed to me the folks doing the most talking were the ones with the least room to judge." She looked at him sharply, surprised by the edge in his voice. "You don't even know me, Mr. Grant." "Rob," he corrected gently. "And you're right, I don't, but I know cruelty when I see it, seen enough of it in my time." He paused, watching Thomas stack stones by the water. "Boy seems happy. Well cared for. That tells me more about you than any amount of gossip." Olivia felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest, something dangerous that felt like hope. She pushed it down firmly. "What brings you to Coolidge?" "Work, mostly. Been drifting since I left Texas. Did some cattle driving, some ranch work, a bit of everything. Henderson's looking for someone to help manage his herd, and the pay's decent. Figure it's time to settle somewhere for a while." He glanced at her. "What about you? You from here originally, born and raised, unfortunately." "My parents had a small farm about 10 miles from here. They both passed 2 years ago. Fever." She didn't mention that they'd already disowned her by then, that she'd heard about their deaths third hand and hadn't been welcome at their funeral. "I'm sorry." The simple sincerity in his voice nearly undid her. She blinked hard against sudden tears. "We manage." "I'm sure you do." Rob stood, brushing off his pants. "I should let you get back to your day. Just wanted to make sure you got away from that particular situation without too much trouble." "Wait," Olivia said, surprising herself. He turned and she struggled for words. "Why did you help me? You'll be working here now, making a life. Associating with me won't do your reputation any favors." Rob's smile was slow and warm, transforming his serious face. "I'm 25 years old, Miss Adams, and I've been making my own choices for a good long while now. I don't much care what narrow-minded folks think of me, and I never could abide seeing someone treated unfairly." He tipped his hat to her. "If you ever need anything, I'll be at the Henderson place. You're welcome to call on me anytime." He mounted his horse and rode away before she could formulate a response, leaving Olivia sitting by the creek with her son, and a strange fluttering in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. Over the next few weeks, Olivia found herself thinking about Robert Grant more often than she should. She caught glimpses of him in town occasionally, always polite, always respectful, never pushing himself into her space but somehow always there when she needed help. He carried her packages to the boarding house once when he saw her struggling with Thomas and a heavy load. He fixed the broken step outside Mrs. Crawford's establishment without being asked, just happened to have his tools with him when he noticed the hazard. He nodded to her on the street, treating her like a lady worthy of respect, and the sheer novelty of it made her heart ache. She learned things about him in pieces. He'd grown up in Texas, son of a horse trader who died when Rob was 16. He'd supported his mother and younger sister until his sister married well, and his mother moved east to live with her sister. He'd been engaged once to a girl named Sarah, but she died of cholera 3 years ago. He was good with horses, better with cattle, and had a reputation for being fair but firm. He never asked about Thomas's father, never pushed for her story. Just treated her and her son with a steady, reliable kindness that felt like water to someone dying of thirst. October brought cooler weather and the first real trouble. Olivia was hanging washing behind the boarding house when she heard angry voices from the street. She peered around the corner to see Mrs. Peterson and 2 other women confronting Thomas, who'd been playing with a stick and a hoop in the alley. "Devil's spawn," Mrs. Peterson was saying, her face twisted with malice. "You'll grow up just as wicked as your mother, mark my words. No decent person will have anything to do with you." Thomas, only 3 years old, stood frozen, his little face crumpling with confusion and hurt. Olivia dropped her washing and ran, but someone else got there first. Rob appeared from the direction of the general store, his long strides eating up the ground. He positioned himself between the women and Thomas, his face hard as granite. "I believe you ladies have better things to do than terrorize a child," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an edge like tempered steel. Mrs. Peterson drew herself up. "This is none of your concern, Mr. Grant. That boy needs to learn his place." "His place?" Rob's voice dropped even lower, becoming dangerous. "He's 3 years old. His place is playing in the sun like any other child, not being tormented by grown women who should know better. His mother is a whore, one of the other women spat. The boy's a bastard. They don't deserve decent treatment. Olivia flinched at the word, even though she'd heard it whispered behind her back 100 times. Hearing it said so baldly, in front of her son, made her feel sick. Rob took a step forward and the women actually backed up. "Let me make something very clear," he said. "I hear any of you, or anyone else in this town, speak to or about Miss Adams or her son with anything less than basic human decency, and I will make it my personal mission to ensure everyone knows exactly what kind of Christian charity you practice. I'm sure your husbands and the rest of the community would be very interested to hear how you spend your time bullying children. How dare you?" Mrs. Peterson's face was scarlet. "We are respectable women. Then act like it." Rob turned his back on them dismissively, crouching down to Thomas's level. "Hey there, partner. You all right?" Thomas nodded, still wide-eyed, and Rob ruffled his hair gently. "Don't you listen to mean words from mean people. They don't know what they're talking about. You're a fine boy, and don't let anyone tell you different." Olivia reached them then, scooping Thomas into her arms. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. Rob stood, his eyes meeting hers. "No thanks needed." He glanced at the women, who were retreating but still muttering angrily. "This has gone on long enough. Nobody deserves to be treated this way." That evening, after Thomas was asleep, Olivia sat by the window and let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to have someone like Robert Grant in her life permanently. Someone strong enough to stand up for her, kind enough to be gentle with her son, steady enough to build a life with. But she crushed the thought quickly. Men like him didn't tie themselves to ruined women. His kindness was charity, nothing more. To think otherwise was to invite heartbreak. But Rob had other ideas. He started appearing at the boarding house on Sunday afternoons, his one day off from the ranch. At first, he claimed to be checking on the repairs he'd made, then he started bringing small gifts for Thomas. A carved wooden horse. A smooth stone he'd found that was perfectly round. A length of rope he showed the boy how to braid. Olivia protested weakly, but Thomas adored him, and she couldn't bring herself to turn away the first positive male influence her son had ever known. "You don't have to do this," she told Rob one Sunday as they watched Thomas play with the wooden horse. They were sitting on the boarding house steps, the autumn sun warm on their shoulders. "Do what? Spend your free time with us. You could be socializing, meeting people, maybe finding a nice girl to court." Rob was quiet for a moment. "What if I've already found someone I'd like to spend time with?" Olivia's heart stuttered. "Rob, don't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because I'm not some innocent girl you can court properly. I have a child, a past, a reputation that would drag you down." She forced herself to look at him. "You deserve better than that." His gray eyes searched her face. "Seems to me that's my decision to make, not yours. You don't understand what you'd be taking on. This town will never accept me. They'll turn on you too if you associate with me too closely. You'll lose friends, opportunities, respect." "I've been here 6 weeks," Rob said, his voice level. "I've made exactly 0 friends among the respectable folk because I can't stomach their hypocrisy. The men I work with at the ranch don't care about town gossip. And as for respect, I'd rather have my own self-respect than the good opinion of people who think it's acceptable to bully children and condemn a woman for one mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," Olivia said quietly. "Not Thomas, never Thomas. I know." Rob's voice softened. "I didn't mean it that way." She shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself. "You should know the truth. His father was Daniel Thorpe, the banker's son. He promised me marriage. I believed him. I was young and stupid and thought promises meant something. The words came out flat, emotionless. She'd told this story to herself so many times it no longer hurt the way it used to. When I told him about the baby, he left town. His father made sure everyone knew I was a scheming woman who tried to trap his son. My own parents sided with the Thorpes. And here I am, 3 years later, still paying for believing in love. Rob was silent for so long that Olivia risked a glance at him. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched, but when he spoke, his voice was gentle. You weren't stupid. You were trusting. There's a difference. And the fact that Daniel Thorpe was a coward and a liar says everything about him and nothing about you. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm and rough against her work-worn fingers. You were 17 and in love. That's not a crime, no matter what this town thinks. Olivia looked down at their joined hands, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. I've been thinking about something, Rob continued. Been thinking about it for weeks now, trying to figure out the right way to say it. He squeezed her hand gently. That boy in there, he's a fine child, smart, kind, brave. You've done an amazing job raising him alone, but he needs a father, someone to teach him things, protect him, give him a man's guidance. Olivia felt her chest constrict. Rob, I can't ask you to, you're not asking. I'm offering. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. I know we haven't known each other long. I know this town has made your life hard, and trusting anyone, especially a man, is probably the last thing you want to do. But I'm asking you to give me a chance. Let me court you properly. Let me prove that not all men are like Daniel Thorpe. Why? The word came out as a whisper. Why would you want to take on someone like me? Rob's smile was small but genuine. Because when I look at you, I see a woman who's stronger than anyone I've ever met. Because you've faced this town's judgment every day for 3 years and you're still standing. Because you put your son first always, and you've loved him enough for 2 parents. He paused. And because when you smile, which isn't often enough, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks before she could stop them. I don't know how to do this, how to trust again. We'll figure it out together, one day at a time. He reached up with his free hand and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow, Olivia. I'm just asking for a chance. Let me take you and Thomas on picnics. Let me fix things around here when they break. Let me sit with you on Sunday afternoons. And if somewhere along the way you decide you might be able to trust me with your heart, well, I'll count myself the luckiest man in Kansas. Olivia looked at this man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she'd been too afraid to voice. She thought about Thomas, who deserved stability and kindness. She thought about herself, worn down by years of scorn, hardly daring to hope for happiness. And she thought about the way her heart felt lighter when Rob was near, the way Thomas laughed more, the way the world seemed less gray when he smiled at her. One day at a time, she repeated softly. Rob's face lit up like sunrise. Yeah, she managed a watery smile. But I have conditions. Name them. You have to tell me immediately if the town's treatment gets to be too much. I won't have you sacrificing your future for us. Done. Next. You have to promise to always be honest with me. No pretty words to spare my feelings. I need truth, even when it's hard. I can do that. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. Anything else? Thomas is my priority, always. If this doesn't work out, it can't affect him. He's already been hurt enough by adult problems. Rob's expression turned solemn. I give you my word, that boy's well-being comes first, and Olivia, he waited until she met his eyes. I don't plan on this not working out. When I commit to something, I see it through. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Olivia had imagined. Rob didn't hide his intentions. He walked with her through town on Sundays, ignoring the whispers and stares. He ate dinner with them at the boarding house, charming even the sour Mrs. Crawford with his polite manners and willingness to fix her perpetually squeaky front door. He taught Thomas to ride on his gentle roan gelding, patient and encouraging as the little boy learned to keep his balance. The town's reaction was predictable. The gossips worked themselves into a frenzy speculating about what Rob could possibly want with a fallen woman. Some suggested he was just using her, that he'd move on once he'd had his fun. Others claimed he must be simple-minded or have some dark past that made him unfit for a decent woman. The crueler ones said Olivia had obviously ensnared another man with her wicked ways. Rob ignored all of it with an impressive determination. When men at the saloon tried to give him advice about finding a proper woman, he told them plainly that Olivia was the finest woman in town and they were fools if they couldn't see it. When women at the general store made pointed comments within his hearing, he stared them down until they fell silent. And when Reverend Walsh tried to counsel him about the state of his soul, Rob suggested the Reverend might spend less time worrying about other people's business and more time practicing the forgiveness his sermons were supposed to be about. November brought the first snow and a new challenge. Mrs. Crawford informed Olivia that she was raising the rent, nearly doubling it. The message was clear. She wanted them gone and she was pricing them out. Olivia did the calculations 3 times, but the numbers didn't change. She couldn't afford it, not on what she made from washing and mending. She told Rob that evening, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. They were in her small room, Thomas already asleep, speaking in low voices. "I'll find something," she said, staring at her work-roughened hands. "There must be another place in town that will rent to me." Rob's expression was grim. "Olivia, you know as well as I do that there isn't. This is Crawford pushing you out at the town's urging. Then I'll leave Coolidge, go somewhere new where nobody knows me. With what money? How would you and Thomas survive on the road?" She had no answer. The hopelessness of the situation pressed down on her chest like a physical weight. "I don't know, but I'll figure something out. I always do." Rob was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was wrestling with something. Finally, he spoke. "Marry me." Olivia's head snapped up. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, his gray eyes steady on hers. "I know it's fast. I know we've only been courting 2 months, but I also know that I care about you and Thomas, and I'm not going to stand by and watch you be forced out of town with nowhere to go. Rob, that's not a reason to get married." "It's one reason, not the only one." He moved closer, taking her hands in his. "I was planning to wait longer to court you properly for at least 6 months before proposing, but I realized something today. I don't need 6 more months to know what I already know. I want to spend my life with you. I want to be a father to Thomas. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every evening. I want to build a future together." Olivia's eyes burned with tears. "You could do so much better than me. There is no better. There's only you." His voice was fierce with conviction. "And before you say, I don't really know you, that we need more time, let me tell you what I do know. I know you're brave and loyal and loving. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I know you put Thomas first in everything, which tells me exactly what kind of person you are. I know that when you laugh, which is rare but precious, it makes me want to spend my whole life finding ways to make you happy. And I know that the thought of you leaving Coolidge, of never seeing you again, is unbearable." "I'm so scared," Olivia whispered. "Scared of trusting you. Scared of what happens if this goes wrong. Scared of not being enough for you." Rob pulled her into his arms and she let herself lean against his solid warmth. "I'm scared too," he admitted. "Scared of letting you down, scared of not being the father Thomas needs, scared of not making you happy enough to make up for all the pain this town has caused you. But I'd rather be scared together than safe and alone." Olivia pulled back enough to look at his face. "You really want this, want us, more than I've wanted anything in my whole life." She searched his eyes and found only honesty, warmth, and something that looked like love. And she realized that somewhere in the past 2 months, she'd fallen in love with this steady, kind man who defended her son and treated her with respect when no one else would. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I'll marry you." Rob's smile was brilliant, transforming his serious face. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and sweet, a promise of all the days to come. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to do everything I can to make you happy," he said. "I promise you that. I know." And miraculously, she did. They were married 3 days later by a justice of the peace in the neighboring town of Garden City. Mrs. Henderson, wife of Rob's employer, stood as witness, beaming with approval. Thomas, dressed in new clothes Rob had bought him, held a small bouquet of late-season wildflowers. Olivia wore a simple blue dress, also new, and carried a bouquet Mrs. Henderson had insisted on providing. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When Rob slipped a plain gold band on her finger and promised to love and honor her for the rest of his days, Olivia felt something break open in her chest, some hard shell she'd built around her heart cracking to let in light. They returned to Coolidge as Mr. and Mrs. Robert Grant, and the town reacted with predictable outrage. Mrs. Peterson declared it a scandal. Reverend Walsh preached a sermon about being unequally yoked with sinners. The ladies' auxiliary made pointed comments about certain men being led astray by temptresses. Rob had anticipated this. He'd already spoken with his boss, and Mr. Henderson had offered them the small foreman's cabin on the ranch property. It was humble, just 3 rooms, but it was clean and sturdy and, most importantly, far enough from town that the gossip's opinions couldn't reach them every day. The cabin became a home faster than Olivia had thought possible. Rob proved handy with repairs, fixing loose boards and patching the roof. Olivia cleaned and arranged their few belongings, marveling at having a real home for the first time in years. Thomas had his own small bed in the corner of the main room, and he adjusted to ranch life with the easy adaptability of childhood. Rob was true to his word about being a father to Thomas. He took the boy with him when he worked with the horses, teaching him to curry and brush them. He carved more wooden animals for Thomas's growing collection. He read to him in the evenings from a worn book of fairy tales. And one night, about 2 weeks after the wedding, when Thomas had a nightmare and cried for his papa, Rob gathered him up without hesitation, soothing him back to sleep. Olivia stood in the doorway watching her husband rock her son, and felt her heart swell so large it seemed impossible her chest could contain it. Their marriage bed started tentatively. Olivia had been so badly hurt by Daniel's betrayal that physical intimacy terrified her. But Rob was patient, never pushing, always gentle. He held her through the nights, kissed her softly, and told her they had all the time in the world. When she finally came to him, ready and willing, he loved her with such tenderness that she wept in his arms afterward, overwhelmed by the difference between being used and being cherished. "I love you," she told him in the darkness, the first time she'd said the words. "I love you too," he replied, kissing her forehead. "You and Thomas both. My family." Christmas came, and Rob surprised them with a small pine tree that he'd cut from the hills. They decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper stars Thomas helped cut out. Rob carved a small nativity scene, his strong hands surprisingly skilled with delicate work. Olivia made a special dinner with a chicken Rob had bought in town, and they sat together by the fire, a family in every way that mattered. On Christmas morning, Rob presented Thomas with a child-sized saddle. "For when you're big enough to ride by yourself," he explained, and Thomas threw his arms around Rob's neck with such enthusiasm that both men nearly toppled over. For Olivia, he'd made a rocking chair, smooth and sturdy, perfect for sitting by the fire in the evenings. She ran her hands over the polished wood, seeing the hours of careful work, the love built into every joint. "It's beautiful," she managed through tears. "You needed somewhere comfortable to sit," Rob said, looking pleased but embarrassed by her emotion. "Besides, I thought maybe, eventually, you might need a good chair for rocking babies." Olivia's breath caught. They hadn't talked about having more children. She'd assumed he'd be content with Thomas. "You want more children, if you do. No rush," he added quickly. "I know Thomas is only 3 and you might want to wait, but eventually, yeah, I'd like to have children with you. Give Thomas some brothers or sisters." She kissed him then, there in front of Thomas and the Christmas tree, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into it. When they broke apart, Rob was smiling and Thomas was giggling, and Olivia thought she'd never been so happy in her entire life. Winter settled in hard, and Olivia discovered the unexpected joy of being snowed in with people she loved. The ranch work continued, but the evenings were long and cozy. Rob taught her to play checkers, and she taught him the songs her mother had sung to her as a child, before everything had gone wrong. Thomas learned to help with small chores, feeding the chickens and gathering eggs, growing in confidence under Rob's patient guidance. In February, Olivia began to suspect she was pregnant. She waited, not wanting to say anything until she was certain, but when March arrived and there was no doubt, she told Rob one evening after Thomas was asleep. He stared at her for a long moment, then swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed breathlessly. "A baby," he said, setting her down carefully. "We're having a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy, Olivia, I'm over the moon." He knelt down and pressed a kiss to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. I'm your papa and I can't wait to meet you." The pregnancy was easier than her first had been, supported by a husband who loved her and a stable home. Rob was attentive without being overbearing, making sure she rested enough, but not treating her like she was fragile. Thomas was excited about becoming a big brother, though his understanding of what that meant was limited. In town, the gossips had new fodder. Some said it proved Rob had only married her for base reasons. Others suggested the baby probably wasn't his. Rob ignored them all with his usual stoic determination, but Olivia could see the strain it put on him sometimes. "I'm sorry," she told him one evening. "Sorry that being married to me makes your life harder." Rob set down the harness he'd been mending and pulled her close. "Listen to me. Every single moment with you and Thomas has made my life better, not harder. Those people in town, they're not my life. You are. This baby is. Thomas is. Everything else is just noise." In late October, their son was born. The labor was hard but shorter than her first, and when Rob placed the squalling infant in her arms, Olivia fell in love all over again. They named him Daniel, which raised some eyebrows in town when the news eventually spread, but it was Rob's father's name, and Olivia was determined to reclaim it from the man who'd hurt her. Thomas adored his baby brother with an intensity that was both touching and occasionally concerning when he wanted to help a bit too enthusiastically. Rob was a natural father, walking the floors with Daniel at night, changing diapers without complaint, marveling over every tiny hand and foot. "He's perfect," Rob said one night, cradling the sleeping infant. "They're both perfect, and you're perfect." I don't know what I did to deserve this, but I thank God for it every day." Olivia looked at her husband holding their son, at Thomas sleeping peacefully in his bed, at the home they'd built together, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "I never thought I could be this happy," she admitted. "After Daniel Thorpe, after everything, I thought happiness wasn't meant for people like me." "There's no such thing as people like you or people like anyone else," Rob said firmly. "There's just people who have been hurt and people who haven't been hurt yet." "You deserved happiness just as much as anyone, Olivia. More, maybe, for everything you survived." As baby Daniel grew, the little family settled into new routines. Thomas started learning his letters from Olivia, who taught him at the kitchen table every morning. Rob was promoted to full foreman, which came with better pay and more responsibility. Olivia took in some mending work again, but only from the ranch families who respected her, and only because she wanted to contribute, not because they needed the money. The town's opinion shifted, slowly but perceptibly. It was hard to maintain moral outrage about a woman who was clearly in a stable, loving marriage. The sight of Rob walking through town with Thomas on his shoulders and baby Daniel in his arms, every inch the devoted father, made even the harshest critics pause. Mrs. Henderson, who'd become a true friend to Olivia, made a point of inviting the Grants to ranch social gatherings, forcing the other families to interact with them or risk offending their employer. Not everyone came around. Mrs. Peterson remained hostile until the day she moved away to live with her daughter in Topeka. Reverend Walsh never quite forgave Rob for rejecting his spiritual guidance, but others softened. The new schoolteacher, Miss Morrison, treated Thomas with kindness when Olivia inquired about enrolling him the following year. The doctor's wife nodded to Olivia on the street. Small mercies, but mercies nonetheless. When Daniel was 6 months old and Thomas had just turned 5, Rob came home one evening with news. "Henderson's selling me the South 40 acres, he announced. "Been saving up and he's giving me a fair price. We can build our own place, Olivia. A real house, not just a cabin. Room for the boys to grow, maybe a workshop for me, space for a proper kitchen for you." Olivia stared at him. "Rob, that's a fortune. We can't afford that." "We can, actually. Been putting away most of my wages since we married. Henderson's letting me pay in installments. And I can do most of the building myself with help from the other ranch hands." His eyes were bright with excitement. "What do you think? Want to build a house with me?" She kissed him by way of answer, and Thomas cheered, and baby Daniel waved his chubby fists, and the decision was made. The house went up over the spring and summer of 1885. A sturdy 2-story structure with 4 bedrooms, a real parlor, and a kitchen big enough for Olivia to work comfortably. Rob built it to last, with careful attention to detail, and the other men from the ranch helped on their days off. A barn-raising atmosphere of community that Olivia had never experienced before. When they finally moved in that September, Olivia walked through the empty rooms and marveled. Her own home, built by her husband's hands, filled with furniture he'd made or they'd bought together. A home where her children would grow up loved and secure, where the past couldn't reach them. Thomas started school that fall, and though Olivia had worried about how the other children would treat him, Miss Morrison ran a strict classroom where bullying wasn't tolerated. Thomas made friends, came home with stories about his day, flourished in the structured environment. Daniel grew into a happy, healthy toddler, following his big brother everywhere on unsteady legs. The differences in their coloring was notable, Thomas taking after Olivia with dark hair and blue eyes, while Daniel had Rob's lighter brown hair and gray eyes, but Rob never treated them differently. They were both his sons, both equally loved, Life settled into comfortable rhythms. Rob's work as foreman kept him busy, but not so much that he missed important family moments. Olivia tended their garden, kept their home, and discovered a talent for preserving fruits and vegetables that soon had other ranch wives asking for her advice. The boys grew and thrived. In the spring of 1886, Olivia found herself pregnant again. This time she told Rob right away, and his joy was undiminished by the fact that it was their second child together. If anything, he seemed even more excited, constantly talking to her growing belly, making plans for the nursery. Their daughter was born in December, a week before Christmas, with a shock of dark hair and her father's gray eyes. They named her Grace because Olivia said that's what their whole life together had been, a state of grace she'd never expected. Thomas and Daniel were entranced by their baby sister. Thomas, now 6 and very grown up, wanted to hold her constantly. Daniel, 2.5, was more interested in poking her gently to see what she'd do. Rob was utterly besotted, this tough cowboy reduced to complete mush by one tiny girl. "She's got you wrapped around her little finger already," Olivia teased, watching him rock Grace while humming tunelessly. "Damn right she does," Rob agreed cheerfully, "and I wouldn't have it any other way." The years that followed were full and busy. Thomas excelled in school, showing a particular aptitude for reading and arithmetic. Daniel was more physical, happiest when helping Rob with the horses or running wild through the fields. Grace grew into a spirited toddler with strong opinions about everything. Olivia and Rob's relationship deepened with time. The passion of early romance matured into something steadier but no less intense. They knew each other's rhythms, understood each other's silences. Rob still brought her wildflowers when he found them. Olivia still packed his favorite foods in his lunch. They still made time for each other, stealing moments alone when the children were asleep, keeping their connection strong amid the demands of daily life. In 1889, when Thomas was 8, Daniel was 5, and Grace was 3, something unexpected happened. Daniel Thorpe returned to Coolidge. Olivia heard about it from Mrs. Henderson during a visit to the ranch. "Apparently his father's dying," Mrs. Henderson said, pouring tea. "Daniel came back from Chicago to settle the estate. Saw him in town yesterday, looking prosperous and smug as ever." Olivia's hands shook slightly as she set down her cup. She hadn't thought about Daniel Thorpe in years, not really. He'd become more symbol than person in her mind, a representation of youthful mistakes and pain overcome. The thought of actually seeing him made her feel sick. She told Rob that evening, trying to keep her voice steady. He listened quietly, his face unreadable, then pulled her into his arms. "Do you want to leave town for a while? Visit Mrs. Henderson's sister in Wichita like she's been asking. We could take the children, make a trip of it." Olivia was tempted, but then she thought about running, about hiding, about teaching her children that shame was something to carry. "No," she said slowly. "No, I don't want to run. I haven't done anything wrong. This is my town now, my home. If Daniel Thorpe has a problem with that, it's his issue, not mine." Rob's smile was proud. "That's my girl." 2 days later, the confrontation came. Olivia was in town buying supplies, Grace on her hip and the boys at school, when she turned a corner and came face to face with the man who destroyed her life and inadvertently given her the son she couldn't imagine living without. Daniel Thorpe had changed. He was heavier, softer, with the look of someone who'd lived comfortably for a long time. He stopped short when he saw her, his expression flickering through surprise, discomfort, and something that might have been guilt before settling into cool politeness. "Olivia, I heard you were still in town." "Daniel," her voice was calm, though her heart raced. "I heard you'd returned." They stood there awkwardly while other shoppers flowed around them, staring with undisguised interest. Daniel's gaze dropped to Grace, and Olivia saw him do the math, saw the moment he realized she'd clearly moved on, built a life without him. "I heard you married," he said. "Some ranch foreman. Robert Grant, yes. And you have children, 3, Thomas is 8 now." "I have 2 others, Daniel and Grace." She said it deliberately, watching his face when she spoke her son's name, seeing him understand that she'd given his name to another man's child. "I see." He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Olivia, about what happened back then. I was young, my father had plans for me, I couldn't stop." Olivia's voice was sharp. "Don't make excuses. You made your choice. You left. You let your father destroy my reputation to protect yours. You knew I was pregnant and you left anyway. I was 20 years old. I was 17. And pregnant. And alone." She adjusted Grace on her hip, this precious child who existed because she'd survived, because she'd built a new life. "But you know what, Daniel? I should thank you, because leaving was the best thing you ever did for me. You would have made a terrible husband and an even worse father. My husband is 10 times the man you'll ever be, and my children have a father who actually loves them. So thank you for being exactly the coward you were." Daniel's face flushed red. "You don't have to be cruel." "I'm not being cruel. I'm being honest." She met his eyes steadily. "I wasted years being ashamed of what happened between us, years letting this town's judgment make me feel small, but I'm not ashamed anymore. Thomas is the best thing that ever happened to me. Everything I have now, my husband, my family, my home, it all came because I survived what you did. So go back to Chicago, Daniel. Settle your father's estate and leave. You don't belong here, and you certainly don't belong in my life." She walked away before he could respond, her head high, and didn't look back. Rob was waiting when she got home, clearly anxious. The boys were playing outside, giving them privacy. Olivia set Grace down with her toys and went straight into her husband's arms. "I saw him," she said. Rob's arms tightened around her. And I told him the truth. That leaving was the best thing he ever did. That you're 10 times the man he is. That I'm not ashamed anymore." She felt Rob's chest rumble with what might have been laughter. "How'd he take it?" "I don't know, and I don't care." She pulled back to look at his face. "I love you, Rob Grant. I love the life we've built. I love our children and our home and the fact that I wake up next to you every morning. Daniel Thorpe is nothing to me, less than nothing. Just a mistake I made a long time ago that led me exactly where I was supposed to be." Rob kissed her then, deep and thorough, a claiming and a promise. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too, more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You and those 3 kids are my entire world." Daniel Thorpe left town 3 weeks later, and Olivia didn't spare him another thought. Her life was too full of present joy to waste time on past pain. The years continued to pass in the pleasant blur of a happy life. Thomas grew tall and serious, with his mother's determination and his stepfather's steady nature. He started helping Rob with the foreman duties, showing a natural aptitude for ranch management. Daniel, the younger boy, was all energy and laughter, the peacemaker of the family who could charm anyone into anything. Grace was fierce and loving in equal measure, wrapping her brothers and father around her little finger while learning ranch skills that shocked the more traditional town ladies. In 1892, Olivia gave birth to their 4th child, another son they named Henry. Rob was 42 by then, Olivia 32, and they'd agreed this would be their last. 4 children felt right, their family complete. The town had long since accepted them. Olivia served on the school board. Rob was respected throughout the county for his knowledge of cattle and horses. Their children were popular and well-adjusted. The whispers about Olivia's past had faded to ancient history, something the younger generation barely knew about. Mrs. Peterson's replacement at the general store always greeted Olivia warmly. A new reverend had taken over the church, a young man focused more on compassion than judgment, and the Grants attended services regularly. Olivia had even reconciled with a few distant cousins who'd shunned her during the worst years, though the relationships remained cordial rather than close. Thomas, at 15, surprised them all by announcing he wanted to go to agricultural college. "I want to learn the newest methods," he explained earnestly, "so I can help run the ranch better, maybe eventually expand our holdings." Rob and Olivia exchanged glances. College was expensive, a luxury many ranch families couldn't afford. But they'd been careful with money, and Rob's reputation meant steady work and good pay. "If that's what you want, we'll find a way," Rob said, and Thomas's face lit up. Daniel, at 12, declared he wanted to be a veterinarian. "Like Doc Peters, but for animals instead of people. I want to help horses and cattle when they are sick." Grace, at 9, changed her aspirations weekly but was currently certain she wanted to be a rancher like her father. "Girls can do anything boys can do," she informed anyone who'd listen, usually while demonstrating her roping skills. Little Henry was only 3, more interested in bugs and rocks than future plans, content to toddle after his siblings and get into mischief. Watching her children grow, Olivia sometimes thought about that desperate girl she'd been, 17 and pregnant and terrified. She wished she could go back and tell her younger self that everything would be all right, that the pain wouldn't last forever, that happiness was coming even though it seemed impossible. But then she realized that girl had been stronger than she'd known. She'd survived. She'd kept her son and loved him when the world told her not to. She'd endured years of shame and judgment without breaking, and when a good man had offered her a second chance, she'd been brave enough to take it. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Rob surprised her with a trip, just the two of them. Mrs. Henderson volunteered to watch the children, insisting that Olivia and Rob deserved time alone. They traveled to Denver, stayed in a real hotel, ate in restaurants, and walked the city streets like courting sweethearts. On their last evening, sitting in a park watching the sunset, Rob took her hand. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "Oh, about how we met. How I saw you being harassed by that reverend, and I made up an excuse about you dropping something just to give you a way out." Olivia smiled at the memory. "That was a terrible lie. Your hand was completely empty." "I know, I panicked. But here's the thing I've been thinking about. What if I hadn't been there that day? What if I'd ridden through town an hour earlier or later? We might never have met. Thomas might never have had a father. Our children wouldn't exist." "That's a terrifying thought," Olivia said softly. "Right. But it makes me grateful for every tiny choice that led us to that moment. Every decision I made that brought me to Coolidge at exactly the right time. Every hardship you endured that kept you there." He turned to face her fully. "I know you went through hell, Olivia. I know the years before we met were awful, but I can't regret them because they led you to me and me to you. I don't regret them either, not anymore." She laced her fingers through his. "I regret the pain, but not the path. Everything I suffered made me strong enough to accept love when you offered it, made me appreciate what we have, and gave me Thomas, who started this whole family." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened. Two people who'd found each other against the odds and built something beautiful from broken pieces. When they returned home, the children mobbed them with hugs and stories about everything they'd missed. The house was chaotic and loud and perfect. Rob caught Olivia's eye over the children's heads and winked, and she felt her heart swell with love for this man who'd chosen her. chosen Thomas, chosen their life together when he could have had anything else. The following years brought more changes. Thomas left for college, writing long letters home about his studies and the modern farming techniques he was learning. Daniel apprenticed with the veterinarian, showing a natural talent for animal medicine. Grace reluctantly accepted that perhaps she might want to be a teacher as well as a rancher, since she enjoyed bossing her younger brother and his friends around so much. Henry started school and proved to be the class comedian, always making people laugh. Rob's hair went gray at the temples, distinguished rather than old. Olivia found laugh lines around her eyes and didn't mind them. They were evidence of a happy life, of years spent smiling. In 1898, Thomas returned from college with a degree and a fiancée, a lovely young woman named Catherine who fit into the family seamlessly. They married that summer in a ceremony that filled the church, half the county turning out to celebrate. Watching her son stand at the altar, confident and loved, Olivia remembered the 3-year-old boy clutching her skirts while women called him terrible names. Look at him now, she thought. Look at the man he became. Rob squeezed her hand, reading her thoughts as he so often did. "We did good," he whispered. "We did," she agreed. Thomas and Catherine built a house on the far edge of the Grant property and started their own herd. Within 2 years, they'd given Rob and Olivia their first grandchild, a sturdy boy they named Robert after the man who'd raised Thomas as his own son. Daniel finished his veterinary training and opened a practice in Coolidge, becoming the first dedicated animal doctor in the county. Farmers and ranchers came from miles around for his services. Grace, surprising everyone including herself, fell in love with the new schoolteacher's brother and married at 21. She and her husband combined teaching and ranching, proving you could indeed do both. Henry, the baby, grew into a charming young man with wanderlust in his soul. At 18, he announced he wanted to see the world before settling down. Rob gave him enough money for a train ticket and 6 months of living expenses, and Olivia packed his bag with enough food for a journey twice as long. "You come home when you're ready," Rob told him. "There'll always be a place for you here." In 1905, Rob and Olivia celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered for a party that lasted all day. Thomas gave a toast thanking Rob for being the father he'd needed. Daniel spoke about how their parents had taught him what real love looked like. Grace made everyone cry by reading a poem she'd written about family. Henry, home from his travels with stories of San Francisco and Seattle, presented them with gifts from his adventures. That night, lying in bed in the house Rob had built with his own hands, Olivia thought about the journey that had brought them here. From shame and desperation to love and belonging. From a scared girl with a baby and no prospects to a woman surrounded by family, respected in her community, blessed beyond measure. "What are you thinking about?" Rob asked, pulling her close. "Everything. How far we've come. How different life is from what I imagined at 17 or even at 22 when you first rode into town. Better or worse, so much better, better than I ever dreamed possible." She turned in his arms to face him. "You saved me, you know, you and Thomas both. You gave me a reason to hope again." Rob shook his head. "You saved yourself, Olivia. You survived years of hell before I showed up. You protected Thomas and loved him and refused to let the world break you. All I did was recognize an extraordinary woman when I saw one and convince her to take a chance on me. We saved each other then." "Yeah," Rob agreed, kissing her forehead. "I think we did." In 1908, at 65, Rob decided it was time to retire from active ranch work. Thomas had been essentially running the operation for years anyway. with Daniel providing veterinary services, and even Henry returned from his wanderings, helping manage the business side. Rob had built something lasting, a family enterprise that would continue long after he was gone. He spent his retirement doing the things he loved, working with horses, though at a gentler pace, playing with his growing brood of grandchildren, sitting on the porch with Olivia in the evenings, watching the sun set over land they owned, surrounded by family they'd built together. Olivia, at 58, finally allowed herself to slow down too. She taught her granddaughters to cook and sew, passed on family stories, tended a garden that was more pleasure than necessity. She wrote letters to old friends, read books she'd never had time for, enjoyed the peaceful rhythm of days measured in grandchildren's visits and quiet evenings with her husband. On a golden afternoon in October 1910, surrounded by 3 generations of family at a harvest celebration, Olivia stood on the porch of the house Rob had built and looked out at everything they'd created. Thomas and Catherine's 4 children ran wild with Daniel's 3 and Grace's 2. Henry's wife, a girl he'd met in Oregon and brought home to meet the family, was visibly pregnant with their first. The air smelled of roasting meat and fresh bread, and laughter rang out from every corner of the property. Rob came to stand beside her, his arm slipping around her waist in a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. Gray-haired and weathered but still strong, still the steady presence she'd built her life around. "Look at all this," she said, gesturing at the scene before them. "Look at what came from that day you pretended I'd dropped something I hadn't actually dropped," Rob chuckled. "Still the worst lie I ever told, but it got me you, so I'd do it again in a heartbeat." 25 years, Olivia marveled. A quarter-century of marriage, and it still feels like not enough time. "We're not done yet," Rob assured her. "Got plenty more years to argue about whose turn it is to feed the chickens and whether Grace's kids are even wilder than she was." Olivia laughed, leaning into his warmth. "I love you, Robert Grant. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. Thank you for loving Thomas like your own. Thank you for giving me a family and a home and 25 years of happiness." "Right back at you, Olivia Grant. You took a drifting cowboy and gave him a purpose, a family, a reason to put down roots. Everything good in my life traces back to you." They stood together watching their family. 2 people who'd found each other when both needed saving, who'd built something beautiful from a foundation of kindness and grown it into legacy. The town that had once shamed Olivia for having a child alone had long since forgotten its judgment, seeing only a respected matriarch surrounded by her devoted family. Thomas called them to dinner, and they walked down together to join the celebration, hands linked, still partners in everything after all these years. The years continued on in gentle succession. Rob and Olivia watched their grandchildren grow, welcomed great-grandchildren, celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, and all the ordinary moments that made up an extraordinary life. They grew old together gracefully, neither one without the other, still holding hands on the porch swing, still finding reasons to make each other laugh, when Rob passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1918 at 75. Olivia grieved deeply, but not hopelessly. They'd had 33 years of marriage, decades of love and partnership and shared joy. He'd lived to see all their children married and settled, had held great-grandchildren in his arms, had built a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. At his funeral, the church was packed. Thomas spoke about the man who'd chosen to be his father when biology hadn't required it, who'd loved him without reservation or hesitation. Daniel talked about integrity and kindness. Grace read a passage from the Bible about love being patient and kind, her voice breaking only at the end. Henry, Ever the wanderer even in middle age, told stories that made people laugh through their tears. Olivia sat in the front pew, surrounded by her children and their children and their children's children, and felt grateful rather than bitter. Some people never got the kind of love she and Rob had shared. They'd been blessed with decades of it, and the pain of losing him was the price of having had him at all. She lived 4 more years, long enough to see Thomas's grandchildren born, long enough to know that the family Rob had started when he claimed Thomas as his son would continue for generations. Long enough to finish the quilt she'd been making, with squares representing every important moment of their life together. When Olivia passed quietly in her sleep in the spring of 1922 at 72, her family gathered to mourn and celebrate. They buried her next to Rob on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at it. The headstone was simple: Olivia Grant, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. But the legacy was complex and beautiful, stretching out in every direction in the form of children and grandchildren, who carried forward the lessons she and Rob had taught about love and resilience, and choosing kindness over judgment. Thomas, now 53 and gray-haired himself, stood at her grave with his siblings and spoke the eulogy. "Our mother faced a world that tried to break her," he said, his voice carrying over the assembled family. "She was shamed for having a child alone, told she was wicked, treated as less than human. But she survived. She loved me when the world said she shouldn't. And when a cowboy named Rob Grant rode into town and said I'd have 2 parents, she was brave enough to believe in second chances." He paused, looking at the sea of faces before him, all descended from or connected to the love between Olivia and Rob. "They built this. All of us, everything we have, it comes from their choice to love each other, to build a family, to refuse to let cruelty and judgment define them. That's the legacy we carry forward. Not shame, not judgment, but love. Always love." The family gathered afterward at the house Rob had built, sharing stories and memories, keeping Olivia and Rob alive in the telling. The grandchildren who'd known them spoke of unconditional love and warm cookies and endless patience. The great-grandchildren who'd only known them as old learned about the young cowboy who defended a woman and her child, the brave woman who'd survived years of scorn with her dignity intact. As the sun set over the ranch that had been built on love and determination, as 3 generations of family filled the house with laughter and tears and the messy business of living, it was clear that Olivia and Rob's story hadn't ended. It continued in every person there, in every choice to lead with kindness, in every act of standing up for someone who needed defending, in every demonstration of love overcoming judgment. A woman had been shamed for having a child alone. A cowboy had said that child would have 2 parents. And from that simple act of decency had grown a family tree with deep roots and spreading branches, a testament to the power of choosing love over judgment, of building rather than destroying, of seeing the person others looked past. Their story lived on, would live on in every generation that followed, proof that one moment of kindness could change everything. That love offered and accepted could heal old wounds and build new worlds. That second chances were worth taking. And that family was made not just by blood but by choice, commitment, and the daily decision to show up and love each other, no matter what the world said. The end came not with sadness but with gratitude, not with regret but with celebration of lives well lived and love well given. Olivia and Rob had started with nothing but hope and determination, and they'd built everything that mattered. Their happy ending was written not just in their own decades together, but in the generations that followed, carrying forward the simple truth they'd proven: that love, real love, could overcome anything.